The tablecloth had been in our family for 31 years. My late wife ironed it every Thanksgiving, smoothing out each crease with the same care she gave everything she loved. I never told my daughters this, but every time I unfolded that tablecloth, I could still smell her perfume in the fabric. Faint, almost gone now, but still there. That Thursday evening in November, I set it on the dining room table myself. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, but I managed. I'd cooked a pot roast. Nothing fancy, just the way my wife used to make it, with carrots and potatoes and a bay leaf or two. I'd been looking forward to this dinner for weeks. Both my daughters were coming. My son-in-law too. Maybe even the grandkids. I was 64 years old, recently retired, and I lived alone in the same house I'd owned for 28 years. A modest house in Glendale, Arizona. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a lemon tree I planted the year my youngest was born. Nothing spectacular, just mine. I need to explain something before I go further. I have never been a man who talks about money. My father raised me that way. You work, you save, you keep your business to yourself. My wife was the same. We lived quietly. We drove sensible cars. We shopped sales. The girls grew up thinking we were just getting by, same as everyone else on the street. That was never an accident. What they didn't know, what I'd never told anyone outside of my attorney and my financial advisor, was that 30 years ago I'd started buying properties. Nothing glamorous. A duplex here, a small rental house there. I reinvested every dollar of rental income. I never touched it. I lived on my salary from the hardware distribution company where I worked as a logistics manager for 26 years. People at work thought I was steady but ordinary. My daughters thought the same. My son-in-law, who made good money in commercial real estate and never let anyone forget it, certainly thought so. By the time I retired, I owned 11 properties across Arizona and Nevada. Mortgage-free on 8 of them. My net worth was something that would have shocked every person who sat down at that Thanksgiving table. I didn't plan to keep this secret forever. I just never found the right moment to say it. And honestly, after my wife passed 3 years ago, I started paying closer attention to how my daughters treated me without her there, as a kind of social buffer. What I saw wasn't always easy to sit with. My older daughter, I'll call her my older one, had married well, as people say. Her husband was loud in the way that insecure men are loud. He had opinions about everything and expertise in nothing, but he delivered both with the same booming confidence. He worked in commercial real estate, which meant he considered himself an authority on anything involving property, money, or business decisions of any kind. He had never once asked me a single question about my life. Not once. In 4 years of knowing me, he had never shown the slightest curiosity about who I was before he arrived. My younger daughter was softer in some ways, but had drifted toward her sister's orbit in recent years. They called each other every day. They had a way of arriving at the same conclusions about things, including, I came to understand about me. I noticed it in small moments. The way my son-in-law would explain things to me in a slow, deliberate voice, like I was a child who needed patience. The way my older daughter would glance at him when I spoke at dinner, the quick sideways look I wasn't supposed to catch. The way they'd sometimes say, "We'll handle it, Dad," about things I hadn't asked anyone to handle. After my wife died, they started suggesting I sell the house, just the once, at first, gently, then more often. The house was too much for one person. The yard was a lot of upkeep. Had I thought about somewhere more manageable? There were some very nice 55-plus communities, my son-in-law told me one Sunday, with great amenities. He'd looked into them, unprompted. I smiled and said I was fine where I was. He said, sure, in the tone of someone who has decided they know better and is simply waiting for you to catch up. I was fine where I was. Thanksgiving dinner started pleasantly enough. The pot roast was good. The grandkids were noisy and happy. For a while I let myself believe the evening would just be an evening, food and family and football on later. Then my son-in-law opened a second bottle of wine. It started with a comment about the house. He'd noticed, he said, that the gutters needed cleaning. He'd seen it when he pulled in. I said I'd get to them. He nodded in that slow way of his and said the roof was probably due for an inspection too at this age. I said the roof was fine. He looked at my older daughter. She looked at her plate. "Dad," she said, "we've actually been talking, as a family." I put down my fork. "We think it might be time to start having a real conversation about your situation. My situation." "What situation is that?" I asked. My son-in-law leaned forward with his elbows on my wife's tablecloth. "You're 64. You just retired. You're in this house alone. That's a lot of responsibility for one person, financially and physically. We think you should consider liquidating this asset and moving somewhere that's actually built for this stage of life." Liquidating this asset. He meant my home, the house where my daughters grew up. He called it an asset to be liquidated. My younger daughter reached over and touched my hand. "We just love you, Dad. We want you to be taken care of." "I take care of myself," I said. "We know you think that," my son-in-law said. The table went quiet in the specific way that happens when someone says something that can't be unsaid. My older daughter looked uncomfortable. My younger daughter's hand was still on mine. "There's a place over in Peoria," my son-in-law continued. "Independent living. Beautiful facilities. I actually ran the numbers. You could probably get somewhere in the low 700s for this place. Put the money in a conservative portfolio, and the monthly fees there run about 3,800. You'd have plenty of runway." He had run the numbers. "On my house?" Without asking me. "And if things progress," my elder daughter said very quietly, "and you need more support down the line, they have a continuum of care. Memory support, skilled nursing, it's all there already." Memory support. I was 64. I had driven myself to dinner that evening. I had cooked a pot roast from memory. I did the crossword puzzle every morning in ink. I looked at my son-in-law. "You thought this through?" "We have," he said, with the smile of a man who believes he is being generous. "We have, and we think it's the right move. Get ahead of it while you still have options." Well, I still had options. I didn't say anything for a moment. I picked up my fork. I took a bite of pot roast. It was good. My wife would have been pleased. "I'll think about it," I said. My son-in-law nodded like he'd expected that. "Of course, no rush, but sooner is always better than later with these things." I nodded. "More wine?" I asked. He held out his glass. I spent the next 3 days sitting with what had happened at that table. I replayed the conversation in my head the way you do when something lodges in you and won't let go. Not the anger. I've learned by now that anger passes, but the clarity. The conversation had handed me something. A clear view of exactly where I stood in my daughter's estimation. An asset to be liquidated. A situation to be managed. A man who needed to be handled before things progressed. What I had never told my daughters, never told my son-in-law, never told anyone beyond my attorney, Roderick, and my financial advisor, Jonah, was this: the house in Glendale was not my primary asset. The house in Glendale was the smallest piece of what I owned. I called Roderick on Monday morning. He's known me for 15 years. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. "I want to revisit the estate plan," I said. "Specifically, I want to talk about what happens if I decide not to leave things the way we currently have them structured." There was a pause. "How different are we talking?" "Significantly different," I said. He said, "Come in Thursday." Between Thanksgiving and Thursday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to each of my properties, just to look at them. A fourplex in Tempe that had been fully rented for 9 years straight. 2 single-family homes in Henderson, Nevada, that a property management company handled for me quietly. A small commercial strip in Scottsdale. 3 units all leased. I drove slowly past each one. The tenants had no idea who owned the buildings they lived and worked in. That was intentional. I'd kept myself at a distance through the management companies. My name wasn't on the signage anywhere. It was just how I'd always operated. I thought about my son-in-law explaining the real estate market to me at dinner. I thought about him running numbers on my house. On Thursday, I met with Roderick. We talked for 2 hours. I told him what I wanted. He took notes. He asked good questions. He didn't try to talk me out of anything, which I appreciated. "Are you certain?" he asked once near the end. "I have been certain since Friday morning," I said. In the weeks that followed, I began paying a different kind of attention. Not suspicious exactly, more like finally taking off a pair of glasses I hadn't known I was wearing. I started watching the dynamics I'd been too generous to fully see before. My son-in-law called twice, both times to mention the Peoria community again. He'd spoken to someone there, he said. Very helpful staff. He could arrange a tour if I wanted. I said I appreciated it and that I'd let him know. His patience was wearing thin beneath the politeness. I could hear it. My older daughter came by for coffee one Saturday. We sat at the kitchen table and she talked about the future in careful, circling language. She mentioned that the house deserved to be someone's primary home again, not just one person rattling around in it. I wondered if she heard herself. I let her talk. My younger daughter texted more than she called. In her texts, she was warmer, more like herself, but twice she mentioned the Peoria place. My son-in-law was clearly briefing the family. What none of them knew was that I had started meeting with Roderick regularly. We reworked documents. We restructured how certain assets were titled. I wasn't acting in anger. I want to be clear about that. I was acting from information. They had shown me exactly who they were when they thought the stakes were low. They thought I was a retired logistics manager with a modest house and a modest retirement account, and a future that needed to be managed on their terms. They had made their calculations accordingly. I made mine. The week before Christmas, I invited both daughters for dinner, just us. No spouses, no grandkids. I cooked simple: chicken soup, good bread, a pie I'd bought from the bakery on Camelback because I didn't feel like baking. They came, and we had a warm evening. We talked about their mother. We looked at old photos. My younger daughter cried a little, and I held her hand. It was a real evening. I want to say that clearly. It was real, and I was genuinely glad to have them there. Near the end of the evening, as we were finishing the pie, my older daughter said, gently, "Have you given any more thought to the Peoria conversation, Dad?" I set down my fork. I looked at her, then at my younger daughter, and at my younger daughter. "I have," I said. "I've given it a lot of thought." They waited. "I'm not selling the house," I said. "I'm not moving to Peoria or anywhere else. And I want to tell you both something that I probably should have told you a long time ago." I told them. I told them about the properties, about the fourplex in Tempe and the homes in Henderson and the commercial strip in Scottsdale and the others. I told them approximate numbers, not precise figures, but enough. Enough so they could understand the shape of what I'd been sitting on for 30 years. I told them about Roderick and Jonah. I told them that I had never been rattling around in this house. I had been living in it. There is a difference. My older daughter's face went through several things in quick succession. My younger daughter just stared at me. "Dad," my older one finally said, "why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because it was my business to keep," I said. "And also because I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing." The silence that followed that sentence was the longest silence I have ever sat through at a dinner table. My older daughter started to say something about how they were only trying to look out for me. I let her finish. I told her I understood she believed that. I told her that belief and action aren't the same thing, and that what had happened at Thanksgiving had not been looking out for me. It had been deciding things about me without asking, planning around me as though I weren't capable of being part of the conversation. It had been her husband putting his elbows on your mother's tablecloth and calling this house a liquidatable asset. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't want to. I was 64 years old, and I had outlasted a lot of things, and I had learned that the quieter you are when you're serious, the more people hear you. "I've made some changes," I said, "to my estate plan. Roderick helped me finalize them last week." My older daughter went very still. "I'm not going to tell you the specifics tonight. That's between me and Roderick for now. But I want you to know that the changes reflect what I saw and heard at Thanksgiving. They reflect what I've been seeing for a while now." My younger daughter said, "Dad, please." "I love you both," I said. "That hasn't changed and won't change. But love doesn't mean I let someone decide my life for me. Not at 40, not at 64, not ever." We said good night. It was not warm at the door. My older daughter hugged me in a way that was more automatic than felt. My younger daughter held on a moment longer and whispered that she was sorry. I kissed her forehead and told her I'd call her after the new year. January came quietly. I rented a pressure washer and cleaned the gutters myself. It took me most of a Saturday, and I ached afterward in ways I was not accustomed to, but I got it done. I planted some new bulbs along the back fence. I started walking 3 mornings a week around the neighborhood, which I hadn't done in years. My son-in-law didn't call again about Peoria. I imagine that conversation had shifted significantly on his end. In February, my younger daughter called and asked if she could come for coffee. I said of course. She came on a Sunday morning and we sat at the kitchen table for almost 2 hours. She didn't make speeches. She didn't try to explain or justify the Thanksgiving conversation. She mostly asked me questions about her mother and about my life before they were born and about the properties. Not the money, but the beginning of it. What had I been thinking? All those years ago when I bought the first one. I was thinking about your mother, I said. I was thinking I wanted her to be secure. I was thinking about the future. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't know you thought about it that way. There's a lot you didn't know, I said. But that's partly my fault. I should have let you in more. She nodded. We drank our coffee. She stayed for lunch. My older daughter and her husband have not come by since December. I've heard from her twice by text. Brief, polite messages that sit at a distance I recognize. I don't know if that distance will close. I'm not in a hurry to force it. Some doors need to be reopened carefully or not at all. What I know is this. I am 64 years old. I own 11 properties. I live in the house where I raised my daughters and where my wife ironed a tablecloth on every major holiday for 27 years. I do the crossword every morning in ink. I walk 3 days a week. I am not a situation to be managed. I think about my father sometimes. He never talked about money either. He died with more than any of us expected, and left it quietly, evenly, without drama. I used to think that was just how he was. Now I think he understood something that took me longer to learn. The way people treat you when they think you have nothing. Tells you everything you will ever need to know. My younger daughter is coming for Easter. She asked if she could bring her kids, and I said yes, please bring them. I'll make the pot roast. I'll put out the tablecloth. My hands are steadier than they used to be. Or maybe I'm just paying better attention. Some things take time to get right. That's not failure. That's just how it goes. I keep coming back to that tablecloth. 31 years old. My wife ironed it every holiday without being asked, without making a production of it, without expecting anyone to notice. She just did it because it was right. That's the thing about character. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the small, unremarkable choices that nobody's watching. What happened at my Thanksgiving table was the result of decades of small choices too. Not mine alone. My son-in-law didn't become a man who puts his elbows on someone else's memories and calls the family home a liquidatable asset overnight. My daughters didn't drift into that kind of thinking in a single season. It accumulated, choice by choice, assumption by assumption, until the night it all sat down at my dinner table and said the quiet part out loud. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since then. Not in a bitter way, I'm genuinely past bitter, but in a way you think about things when you've lived long enough to see patterns. Actions have weight. The way you speak to someone when you think they have nothing tells that person something permanent about you, and it tells you something permanent about yourself, whether you realize it or not. My son-in-law thought he was being practical. He probably still does. But practical is not the same as right, and efficiency is not the same as wisdom. What I've come to believe, and this took me most of my 60s to fully understand, is that a person needs 3 things to live well. The first is integrity. Not the word, the practice. Doing what's right when it costs you something. My wife had it in abundance. She showed it in how she treated the checkout clerk the same way she treated her boss. I tried to have it. I'm still working on it. The second thing is judgment. Real judgment. Not just being smart, but knowing what matters and why. My younger daughter has this. She came to my kitchen on a Sunday morning and asked real questions instead of making speeches. She didn't need me to explain the whole architecture of what I owned. She needed to understand who her father was. That's the wiser question. It took courage to ask it, and I respect her for it. The third thing is the one nobody talks about enough. Endurance. Not the dramatic kind, not climbing mountains or surviving disasters. The quiet, daily kind. Getting up and walking the neighborhood 3 mornings a week when your knees ache, renting a pressure washer and cleaning the gutters yourself, because this is your house and you take care of what's yours. Sitting through a long, uncomfortable silence at a dinner table because you know what needs to be said and you're going to say it without flinching. I'm 64. I still do the crossword in ink. My younger daughter is coming for Easter, and I'm going to make the pot roast and put out the tablecloth. My older daughter and I are not where we were, and I don't know if we'll get back there. That's a grief I carry quietly, but I won't pretend the Thanksgiving conversation didn't happen. I won't smooth it over to make the holidays easier. That's not endurance. That's just avoidance wearing a polite face. What I know is that my younger daughter sat at my kitchen table and chose to be honest with me. That choice has weight. I'm going to honor it by being honest back. That's how things actually heal. Not through grand gestures, but through two people deciding, one Sunday morning at a time, that they'd rather know each other than manage each other. The lemon tree in my backyard is blooming again. I planted it the year she was born. Some things grow slowly, quietly, and then one day they're just there, solid and real, and yours.